Well, welcome everyone to the OCVS hosted webinar. This is an update on the federal special condition suitability to interact with minors. So presenting today is myself, Teresa Nino. I'm the Director of Grant Programs and Training for the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Office of Crime Victim Services, also known as OCVS. And then along with the OCVS Grants and Training team, they will be monitoring the chat, and then we will have some opportunity for questions at the end as well. Joining us is Amanda Dotson and Ian Henderson from the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault, of course known as WCASA. And in addition to that, we have Brandon Smith with us, and he is with the Wisconsin Department of Justice Crime Information Bureau, also known as CIB. So during today's webinar and meeting, OCVS will share additional guidance that we received related to the 2019 special condition suitability to interact with minors. So as many of you know, this condition is not new, but we do have a new guidance and information that we're going to share. So just kind of overall, we're going to talk about the federal special condition, language and scope. We'll talk in pretty detailed information about compliance, so registry checks, background checks, the new piece, which is a required fingerprint-based background check, and then the written determination. And lastly, we will provide resources and information for child sexual abuse prevention policies and procedures. So we'll go ahead and get started with federal special condition suitability to interact with minors language. So the language states determination of suitability is required in advance for individuals who may interact with participating minors. So we're going to further break down what that means, compliance, all of that stuff. But first, I just want to highlight where the condition comes from. So this condition comes from the U.S. Department of Justice, and then it is passed down through the Office of Justice Programs, also known as OJP, and the Office on Violence Against Women, also known as OVW. So what that means for us, all of us on this call, is that all VOCA and VAWA recipients at any tier have to comply with the special condition. And then thinking about within our agencies who it applies to specifically, it applies to all of those working on the federally funded project, regardless of employment status. So that's why we provide guidance around its staff, volunteers, contractors, anyone working on the federally funded project. So there is additional information available to all of you on the OJP website. So if you're interested, please check that out. It kind of goes into further detail, and then that website is linked directly on this slide. So let's further explore scope and who the condition applies to. First, as I already mentioned, it does apply to all staff, volunteers, and contractors that are part of the federally funded project and that will interact with unaccompanied minors. So that is the key there. And it does include over the phone interaction. So it's in person or over the phone anytime that there may be unaccompanied interaction with a minor. The condition really is intended to be applied broadly. So it doesn't matter if the federally funded project is solely to serve adults. Really what you have to think about or kind of go back to is, will this individual be reasonably likely or expected to interact with unaccompanied minors? So with that in mind, there is one possible exception that we wanted to highlight today. So the exception would be if the federally funded project is non-youth serving, so only serving adults, and there are safeguards in place to ensure that there will not be interaction with unaccompanied minors. An example of that could be, so for example, if you work for, your agency is a large agency, serves youth overall, but there are safeguards in place. So an example could be a separate building. So it's like, yeah, our agency serves youth, but the project is at a totally separate building. there is not an opportunity for interaction with unaccompanied minors. So that's an example. Another one could be a locked entrance. So maybe it's the same building, it's a large place, but there's a locked entrance. So again, that opportunity for interaction just really isn't there. If you feel like you may fit into that exception rule, what we do require, and this is from our federal grant managers, is that we would need a written statement from the agency detailing this, and then also detailing in writing the safeguards that are in place. So again, if you feel like you fit into this exception, please reach out to your grant manager, and then we can kind of work through it, like we can work through things with you and really talk about the scope and see if your agency is part of that exception rule. But I did want to reiterate that the intention is that it is applied broadly. So most everyone does have to follow this special condition. So next up, we have compliance. So how can we ensure that we are all complying with this required special condition? So step one is registry checks. So registry checks must be completed and documentation must be on file. The two that always need to be checked are listed up on the screen here. So the first one is the Drew Shodian National Sex Offender Public website, and the website link is right there. And then the second one is the Wisconsin Sex Offender Registry. Again, the link is there. In addition to those two, when applicable, so the registries for any other state where the individual has lived, worked, or gone to school in the last 5 years. So in order to kind of catch those individuals and ensure that we are all complying with it, I know that many agencies have created like a questionnaire for new employees, volunteers, or contractors that ask that question. And then that's what would trigger the response to look at those other states. The second step is background checks. So background checks, so similar to registry checks, background checks must be completed and documentation must be on file. This is where we're getting to the new guidance, the new information that we received. So the new part of the process is required fingerprint-based background checks. Now, as you'll all recall, previously or currently, caregiver background checks have been sufficient to satisfy this special condition. Due to additional guidance received by OCVS, this is no longer the case. So now fingerprint-based background checks are required and replace the caregiver background check. So the fingerprint-based background check is required in place of what's already happening. This will apply to all individuals, new and current, by the end of the VOCA grant cycle, which is 9/30/2023. This will all be shared, or this all has been shared, I should say, in the materials that Kay sent out yesterday. So you will all have received that, and it's also posted on our website, but I did want to highlight that here as well. Now we're going to get into what does that mean, fingerprint-based background checks, how is this going to impact everyone? So as stated on the OJP website, again, go ahead and check out that language if you're interested. If a fingerprint-based background check is possible in your state, it is required. And so basically the additional guidance that we received is that it is possible in Wisconsin, and therefore it is required in order to satisfy the special condition. The process to obtain fingerprint-based background checks is detailed in all the materials that we sent out yesterday, but I do just want to briefly go over the process here just so we have it in this webinar. So the first step is to complete the qualified entity application. And so basically it's filling out agency information, and then you email that completed application to the CIB. Their email address is included right on the documents that we sent out, so you should have that. So then as directed by the CIB, you set up a Works account. So you wait to hear from them. Once they say, okay, yep, you're in our system, you can go ahead and set up the account. So Works is the Wisconsin Online Record Check System. I would suspect that many of you or all of you already have an account because that's how you get the caregiver background checks completed. But if you don't, you would set up the account. If not, you can go ahead and bypass that. The next step then is to complete the required security awareness training. This training is not lengthy at all. However, it is required and you are required to log that it's been completed and then keep it on file within your agency. The next step then is to sign the non-criminal justice agreement and then email it right to the CIB so they can keep it on file. Now, the fifth step, which this is going to require some discussions within your agency and really to determine the best way to actually obtain fingerprint-based background checks. And so the fifth step is to determine what method you are going to use. There are a couple options for this. The first option is collection via field print. And so essentially this is a company that has authorized locations throughout Wisconsin where agencies can send individuals. They will collect the fingerprints electronically and then send directly to the CIB. So the agency is a little bit removed from the process. It might feel a little bit more streamlined for your agency if you decide to go with this option. The only thing that I do want to note is that there are some limited availability of field print locations, authorized locations in northern Wisconsin. So that may be a challenge that your agency will have to work through. But if you Google field print, you'll be able to see right on their website the authorized locations that they do have available. So option number 2 then is collecting fingerprints on a fingerprint card. So collection can be done at your local law enforcement department, and MOUs, agreements, kind of what that process will look like will have to be set up between your agency and law enforcement. So it might look different depending on your local law enforcement department or the area of the state that you are located in. But basically the process is that you have the individual go to the law enforcement department, they take fingerprints, physical fingerprints on a fingerprint card, and then the agency is responsible for physically mailing that card to the CIB. I think the one thing to note with that process is obviously we will, the fingerprints are going to be out there and in the mail. So it is less secure. However, we do understand that with limitations in field print, and I will go over cost in just 1 minute, considering cost and just kind of what works for your agency and your community, that might be the best option. So cost, and I know I've been seeing some questions coming up related to cost, and that is a great question. So each background check will cost the agency approximately $30. This does include the caregiver background check. So right now, my understanding is that cost is around $10 per individual. So now the cost per background check will be around $30 per individual. The exact cost is on the document sent. It actually differs very slightly by maybe $1, depending if the person is a volunteer or a staff member. So that's why I say around $30. So please check that out. And then the field print fee is on top of the $30 cost, and that is $7.75 per search. So we understand that this is a burden for your agencies. Of course, these costs are allowable under the grant. Unfortunately, we do not have additional funds to go towards this new process. Again, all of this information, I know I went through this quickly, it is detailed in the handouts that were sent yesterday by Kay. So the final piece to the fingerprint-based background check process is a required audit by the CIB. Now, let me explain exactly what I mean by that. So the CIB is required to audit all entities that conduct fingerprint-based background checks across the state. So thinking about what this might look like for your agency, the frequency is 1 time in a 5-year period. The focus is really ensuring that background check results are protected within your agency so that they won't unintentionally get out or be available to somebody that they shouldn't be. And the audit is conducted typically via an email conversation. So if you were chosen for an audit, you would get an email from the CIB with a questionnaire. And again, the questionnaire is going to focus on how are you protecting this information? You fill it out, send it back to them. The CIB might have follow-up questions, kind of depending on the situation. Now, we do have Brandon on the call. And so again, once we get to the questions section, he will be available if you have questions about this process. But I will say that we do have a recommendation directly from Brandon in a way to ensure that you pass the audit. So the recommendation is that you do not print background check results at any time. So results can be viewed in Works for 6 months. And so obviously you'll look at them right away when they come in, either when you're making the hiring decision or that redetermination for staff that already work for the agency. And then you probably won't need them again, but you can revisit them for 6 months to satisfy the special condition, or kind of thinking about like proof that you might need on file in case of an audit by, or I should, excuse me, monitoring by OCVS or a potential audit by the OIG. What we recommend is that you follow the CIB's recommendation, and then also that you print or save a screenshot if you have electronic files of the Works proof that the background check was completed. So we will never request to see confidential information, the results of the check. We trust that your agency is following the special condition, determining that the individual is either safe or unsafe to interact with unaccompanied minors. The only thing that we might ask for in monitoring is, hey, can we see proof that you're actually running these checks? So again, if you just kind of take a screenshot of that, either print it or save it electronically, that would be sufficient. So now that all the checking is completed, we just have to talk about documentation. So a written determination stating that the registry checks, the background checks were completed, and that the agency has determined that individuals are suitability to interact with minors. So you can have a set form, and we do have an example or sample form from WCASA that we have shared and we can continue to share, that kind of has that language in there. So you'll just have to have that for each individual. And then the written determination has to be updated every 5 years. So the agency does have to have some type of process policy in place to ensure that that happens. And now, very lastly, is that agencies are required to have child sexual abuse prevention policies and procedures in place. So on this slide here, we do have resources, or a resource, which is the CDC guide. So child sexual abuse prevention policies and procedures should address all 6 components as outlined by the CDC. So you can go ahead and follow this link to get that information, but it's nicely laid out and easy to follow as far as what those 6 components are. And then we also have resources from WCASA available. So WCASA created for all of you a few things. One, a sample policy, so a child abuse prevention policy that you can use and kind of alter for your agency. A sample determination form. So again, a form that really says, yep, we determined this person is suitable to interact with minors. So please feel free to go ahead and use that, alter it as needed. And then a sample background check consent form. Again, all of this has been emailed to all of you. They're also available on our website, so on WCASA's website and OCVS's website, and then they're linked on the PowerPoint. So hopefully you will be able to get access to them when needed. So I know this has been a lot of information. I know I've seen a lot of questions come in. I haven't been able to keep up on all of them as I've been talking, but we do have an opportunity now to go through some of those questions. So I'm going to defer to my colleague, Justin. Are there any pending questions that we need to talk about right now?
Sure, there's a few. I think first is there's been a few questions about what is considered an unaccompanied minor. Is there a definition for that?
So I as far as a specific definition, I would refer you to the OJP website to gather that information. The guidance that OCVS has received is that an unaccompanied minor is somebody that is not accompanied by another safe adult. So the safe adults in their definition would be someone like a guardian, a parent, somebody like that. So really think about it in the sense of having one-on-one interaction with the child, either over the phone or in person.
Another question is, do board members who are considered volunteers need to have fingerprints done?
Only if they are likely to interact with unaccompanied minors. So that might differ depending on your agency, depending on how things are set up. I know that at some agencies, board members will volunteer for shelter services. In that situation, yes, they would have to. If the board is completely removed from direct victim services, then the answer would be no.
And then we had a few come in that are pretty similar. So I'll try to phrase this in a way that I hope captures all of them. So what if, I guess there's a few different things, if staff went through this process in another state or at another agency, or if they're currently employed somewhere else where they have to do this requirement, would they still have to do it at the project we fund?
Okay, so as far as if it's been done in another state, the answer is yes, for sure. It does still need to be done. And Brandon, feel free to jump in here, but my understanding with the fingerprint-based background check is that it's still running just for the state of Wisconsin. So it is possible that it could capture things in other states that have been reported to the database, but it's not a fail-safe. So you can't assume that it's covering other states. And now, so then the second part of the question is if you have an individual that's coming from another agency and they've already been determined suitable to interact with minors, I think that's kind of difficult to answer in just kind of a blanket way. If you do have a situation like that, I would say reach out to your grant manager and we can kind of work through it. I think it would depend on a couple things. One, what information is available to your agency as far as the actual background check and registry check and all that was done. So really ensuring that your agency is responsible to determine if that person's suitable. So that's one thing to consider. And then another thing is that redetermination has to happen every 5 years. And so I think another thing that the agency would want to look at is how recent were these checks done? And if we're coming up on the 5 years, does it make sense to do it again?
So from a CIB perspective, I think I saw a question come through, if somebody has gone through this fingerprint process for AmeriCorps or something like that, would they have to do a fingerprint search for this purpose as well? And my answer to that is it depends on the reason or the authority for why the AmeriCorps fingerprint search was done. And is that the same authority for why this grant recipient VCA check would be done? So if we're both done under the Volunteers for Children Act, then you could, in theory, use the results of that background check as long as it conforms with grant requirements under the grant that we're speaking about. So I hope that answers that question that I saw come through.
I have another clarifying question. Does this apply to only project that OCVS/VOCA funds, or is it their entire organization?
Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. First of all, thank you, Brandon, for answering that last question. And okay, so it only applies to those that are working on the federally funded project. So staff, volunteers, contractors that are working on the federally funded project. So that would either be VOCA funding or VAWA funding, whether it be from OCVS or another entity.
Another question, what if staff refuse to have the fingerprinting done?
If they refuse to have it done, unfortunately, that means that the agency cannot determine if they're suitable to interact with minors or unaccompanied minors. So then unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to work on the project.
Can people start working before the background check is fully complete?
They cannot. So as part of the language, it states that there has to be a predetermination or a determination in advance. The language is something similar to that. And so it has to be done before that individual would have the opportunity to interact with unaccompanied minors. I will say that not to complicate things, but I do want to say I understand that we are allowing some time for this process to be in place. Now, the process to do background checks in general, caregiver background checks, all of that should already be done within the agency. That is required. The special condition has been around for a couple of years now. And so we understand though that it's going to take a little bit of time for the fingerprint-based background check piece to get put into place. And so that's why we're allowing until the end of September for that. But the determination and ensuring that all the other checks are done, plus a caregiver, should be being done currently already for staff before they're interacting or have the opportunity to interact with unaccompanied minors. I hope that makes sense. Please, someone ask if that created more confusion.
There are a few questions I think I can answer quick surrounding modifications. Yes, you can use part of your VOCA project or VAWA project to pay for these expenses. You would still have to submit a budget modification though. So I hope that clears that up. And as far as, I think there was a question about the category, I think the other budget category would be fine for these expenses. We have another question. Where was it? Do we interpret minors to be under 18?
Good question. And the answer is yes.
Does local law enforcement have to help with this process?
I do not believe so. I know when we were communicating with Brandon, as far as, coming up with like, what are the most streamlined options for our agencies? And Brandon, again, feel free, jump in, correct me if this is not accurate, but it's my understanding that the law enforcement department would have to, kind of voluntarily be like, yeah, we'll enter into an agreement or an MOU with our agency to help with this process.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be using them quite a bit, you might want to make sure that they're, on board with the process. Most law enforcement agencies will likely assist in this situation. Some may charge a fee for fingerprinting services. But, what I usually suggest is that the subject of the fingerprint search, or whomever's helping set up the appointment, just start geographically, the most local law enforcement agency, and just kind of work your way out from there. And hopefully you don't have to look too far to get an agency that will assist.
Can I ask a question? We have in our child advocacy center, we have a large kind of general waiting room because we serve multiple programs in our office location. And so when families first present to the CAC, they check in there and then are led back to a separate waiting room by our advocate case manager. would those initial front desk staff need to be fingerprinted? They're not VOCA funded, but I didn't know if that was considered working in a VOCA funded project.
That's a good question. So yeah, I think the standard answer is if they are part of the project, that they would have to be. Now, we might need to look into that a little bit more in detail to look at how your funding is broken down. So I apologize, but we might need to actually look at your budget and talk more in depth of how your project is funded, because the general rule, again, is that it's individuals working under the federally funded project. So if you can make an argument to say like they're not working under the project, they have nothing to do with the project, then the answer would be no. They're not part of the project. They don't need to have those checks done. I speculate that it might get a little blurry though, just from what you've shared. So I would recommend just reaching out to your grant manager and we can work through that specific scenario.
Hey, Teresa. So I was at the VOCA Summit last week at DC, and we talked a lot about suitability determination. And actually, CASA and CJA was actually brought up as a question. And they did say, so anybody like forensics interviewers, law enforcement, etc., do qualify under this and will need background checks. So we can reach out to like OVC and get more details on that. And then some other things I saw questions. And so volunteers with incidental contact, and if they're with a staff that entire time, it does not apply. But if the volunteers are ever on their own, like putting away donations or something like that, they do have to have this background check complete. And so even if a child is accompanied by the minor, or like accompanied by adults, whether it's their parents or whatever, this condition does apply. So it does have to go in effect with any staff member who's working with the child, even if their parent is in the room.
Any other questions that we have pending, Justin?
Yep, there's a few. And then I'll probably in a minute ask people who feel that questions aren't answered to either put them in the chat again or just unmute. How do they waive this requirement if they feel it does not apply to them?
So you would submit something in writing to your OCVS grant manager that details why you believe that you meet the exception criteria. And then you have to specifically state safeguards that you have in place to ensure that there will not be interaction. And so again, some of those safeguards could be a totally separate location, a locked entrance, something like that. And then you will submit that to your grant manager, and then we'll help you evaluate if you do meet the requirement for the exception.
How does this apply for staff or volunteers that might be minors themselves?
That's a really good question. I don't think we've ever gotten that before, and I don't think I've ever heard OJP or OVW address that specifically. We will get back to you. I don't know the answer to that.
Would a 17-year-old defendant fall under this requirement if the program is interacting with them?
Let me just ask for clarification. Are you asking, are they considered an unaccompanied minor? Or are they?
I believe that is the question. Like that is the scenario. Like would that individual be considered an unaccompanied minor?
Yes, any individual that's under 18 if they're unaccompanied.
Is the fingerprint background check now included in the caregiver background check, or are they two separate checks?
So the So yeah, it's kind of the other way. The caregiver background check is now included in the fingerprint-based background check process. So you do not, once you get the fingerprint-based background check process set, and that's what you're doing, you will no longer run the separate caregiver background check.
See if there's any I missed. Will there be any tracking of the impact this will have on local programs, i.e. not being able to hire staff and limiting services to victims due to staffing limitations that could be shared with the feds?
Absolutely. Please do. I know that the feds have already received some harsh feedback, or specific feedback, I guess I should say, related to this. And we are absolutely happy to pass that on. So yes, please, anything that you want to share with us that would be helpful in us communicating and advocating to the feds in this process.
I saw a comment about the link we provided on the OJP website did not include the definition. We have a different link that would define that, so we can send it out again with the documentation.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, we can share everything that, yeah, we have as far as resources. No problem.
Has the federal government explained why this or where this special condition came from?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I don't want to misspeak or misrepresent their intentions. My understanding is that this is in place to help prevent child sexual abuse in victim service agencies, or the potential for.
We had a question about a Wisconsin statute and CASAs that kind of contradicts this. I don't think we'll be able to answer it live. I think we'll have to look into it. So the statute does not allow court-appointed special advocate programs to require fingerprint-based background checks unless the DOJ non-fingerprint-based reasonably indicates that additional info is needed.
Yeah.
That.
Agreed. Yeah. Connect with us directly on that. We'll have to communicate with OJP and OVW to figure that out.
I think that was the CASA question. If there was a different CASA question, I missed it. Just unmute and let me know.
Can I ask a question that was in the chat and didn't get answered?
Yeah.
Which is, so for current staff, do we have until September 30th to do them all? I know new staff, we can't hire them until we do it, but what about current staff?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. So yeah, let me further try to clarify this, because I think before, when I was discussing this, like I might have had it a little bit convoluted, or I was describing it in that way. So you have until September 30th to get the new fingerprint-based background check stuff in place. And that does mean for new staff and current staff. So that all has to be done by September 30th. The full process for determining if an individual is suitable to interact with minors, that should already be in place within your agency, and should be happening right now and continue to happen until the fingerprint-based background check stuff is in place. So the only change should, I believe, unless you decide to look at other things within your agency to change the process, would be that instead of running the caregiver background check, you would be doing the fingerprint-based background check instead.
So I have my camera's off. I have a question about the unsuitability determination. Am I reading it properly? You might have answered this already. I'm sorry, I'm too late. Is it 5 years, being on the sex offender and it's forever if you have a felony or misdemeanor that would make you unsuitable?
So there are a few specific felonies that make you unsuitable and that we cannot be at the discretion of the agency. I recommend that you check out the OJP website to get those specific criteria. And then beyond that, beyond those few specific ones that they actually list on their website of like, yep, if someone has this on their record, like they cannot work under the federally funded project, everything else is at the discretion of the agency.
But it's forever. If it was 30 years ago.
If it's one of the specific ones that are listed, yeah. Now, that is a good opportunity where we can provide some feedback in, talking about how that may be harmful to survivors or individuals that have a criminal history or criminal past that may be working for the agency. So I think that's an opportunity for feedback, but yes, that is the rule.
Hi, this is Sarah Aho. I actually had put questions in, but in talking about the registry, so I just started as a victim witness coordinator, but my prior role was with the sex offender registry. And I noticed that the link that you have on there, I don't know if that's the one for the public or if that's a different one, because the registry for the public has been updated. And so it doesn't reflect that if that's supposed to be the one for the public. And then also juveniles don't show up on the registry, even once they become an adult. So when somebody's doing a registry check, how is that still being reflected somehow? Obviously, like through the other research or, like through the CID and stuff like that?
So good question. So one, as far as the link, that is the link that we were given. So if you have a different link, do you want to put that in the chat? And then we can go ahead and take a look to see kind of what the discrepancy is there. So thank you for that. And then yeah, so as the link, so we're recommending to do the checks based on the language from OJP. And so that is a really good question. I'm not exactly sure how juvenile history is captured on registry checks. I don't know, Brandon, do you know if for the fingerprint-based background check, if that stuff is carried over?
It is not. So, the only way you won't see juvenile information through this method. So I think that's all you can really say. There's no way for us to circumvent that to provide juvenile information, unfortunately. However, if a person is an out-of-state registrant and they do get results from the FBI, it should indicate that they're an active registrant, but it won't return juvenile information.
Hi, I'm Sarah Flynn. I have a quick question. So it was recommended that we don't print off the fingerprint check. Does that include the caregiver background check then too? Because when we have our on-site visit from the DHS, they want to see the caregiver background checks. So are those separate? Are those two separate pieces of documents?
If you've done a fingerprint-based background check, like we're talking about under VCA, that will include the IBIS letter, which is the caregiver check through DHS.
So we can print it off though, because we'll need that.
So if you do print it off, I suggest locking it in a filing cabinet that is in a secure room and only accessible by authorized individuals.
Right, that's how we do it now. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Brandon, do you know, can you just print off that part of it and not print off the fingerprint part?
So for some context about why we are auditing, the FBI has a designated agency for each state. Wisconsin DOJ is the designated CGIS security agency for CGIS systems agency for Wisconsin. So as that liaison, we are responsible for allowing access to FBI criminal history record information, which kind of requires us to go out and do these audits of these individuals. So the focus of our audits is really, what are we doing with that FBI criminal history record information, and how are we safeguarding that? So my recommendation is if you do need to have that printed off, that you do store it in a filing cabinet that is locked in a secure room, only accessible by individuals that are authorized to see that information. If and when we come and audit you, that should allow you to be in compliance. So again, if you do need to print it out for other reasons, you can do that. Just keep in mind, it's the criminal history record information that needs to be safeguarded. So I do also want to touch on, taking screenshots, or printing off some sort of screenshot would be similar. If you're capturing any part of the results that includes, federal or FBI criminal history record information, that is technically, again, FBI criminal history record information, and could potentially be out of scope of the audit, depending on what you do with that screenshot. So just keep in mind, if you do take a screenshot, you could think of it on the digital side as in the physical side. So on the physical side, we're telling people, if you print this out, put it in a locked filing cabinet, only accessible by, authorized individuals. If you save a screenshot or a digital representation of the results, is it on a secure network drive, only accessible by your agency and authorized personnel? So I hope that helps explain.
I'd like to ask something. Was there any care and consideration into the BIPOC community when this was established by the feds and the non-native people? I'm sure that was the high content of who made these decisions, because we are trying to hire these people within our communities, and roadblocks keep going up and up and up, and it's really disheartening. So can somebody address that issue with me?
Thank you so much for the question and comment. Unfortunately, we weren't part of the discussions that created the special condition. And so truthfully, we can't answer that, but we are happy to pass along your feedback to the feds and share your concerns.
Thank you. And I would also like to, if there's any option to be a part of those discussions, I would certainly like to, myself and any BIPOC person, to be a part of that as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Do you, maybe we could connect with you offline or after this, just to make sure that we have your contact information in the potential opportunity if those do come up.
Absolutely. And anybody else who's interested can tag along. Absolutely.
I have a question. So many times as we were making reports out, we were told only include what's in your VOCA project. The staff, don't include numbers from people outside because they're not a part of the project. Excuse me. But what I'm hearing is, though, with this suitability to work with minors, it does include kind of people who are not part of the budget, but who are part of the organization and maybe the program. Let's say our SAVES funded staff. Are they part of this? That's my question.
So it does only apply to those working on the project. I understand that can get a little bit gray or blurry, but basically, and the reason that we can't use the word federally funded individuals is because it also applies to volunteers, contractors, etc. But if you look at it maybe in the sense of it would be a volunteer that you're going to use as match on the project. And I understand that match is currently waived for VOCA, but just assuming that it's back in place for this example. And so it's truly people or individuals that are part of that federally funded project that it applies to. So it does not apply to everyone within your organization.
Okay, I have a few more questions I want to highlight out of the chat. How about undocumented volunteers? My impression of working for the project means we would no longer be able to have them volunteer.
That's a really good question. Brandon, I don't know if there's any way, has this ever come up before? Any ideas on ways to address that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I was actually fixing the chat that I was trying to send. So.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Yeah, so the question is around individuals that are working under the project or volunteering under the project, but they're undocumented in the United States. I don't know if that question has ever come up before, or what we could do to address that.
So our perspective is we take fingerprint submissions and we process them. We do not require a social security number. We do not, the FBI also does not require a social security number to do a fingerprint-based background check. So from that perspective, I don't really have anything that would have any bearing on whether or not you could submit somebody who is undocumented. So from our perspective, we do not require a social security number, and I don't know if there are any other hurdles that would prevent somebody from doing that, but I don't see any. I've heard about field print requiring a social security number, and I'm trying to talk with them to get some clarification on that. So there might be an issue if somebody tries to utilize field print for somebody who is undocumented and does not have a social security number. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. I think it would affect a small part of the population here, but it's something that could affect it.
I would imagine though that people would have to present identification, right, to you? And then this is done at a law enforcement agency, like at the police department, right?
Correct. So, typically there's a government issued ID of some sort that is checked to verify the person being fingerprinted is the person, that is intended to be fingerprinted for that purpose.
I have another question I think you might be able to answer, Brandon. I have at least one employee who is a resident of the United States and is not a citizen yet. Do you know if she'll still be able to get fingerprinted? I think you kind of answered that.
Yeah, so I think she should be able to get fingerprinted. Again, I'm trying to clarify with field print regarding what the issue is with that, since neither Wisconsin nor the FBI require a social security number. So I think, they should be sent through the process.
Then we have a clarifying question. Is it everybody in their organization, which includes office staff, RNs, advocates, volunteers, etc., or is it just those funded by the project or would be listed as match on the project?
It is just those that are working under the federally funded project. That's who it applies to. So volunteers, staff, contractors, and I think I saw another question kind of similar to this in the sense of like so this applies to all tiers. So that would include, again, subawards, subcontracts, anything you have within your agency, but it is solely the federally funded project that this applies to. So to further clarify that question, yeah, if you have staff that, so I'm assuming, or obviously this is maybe a hospital or a CAC, if they do not work on the federally funded project, this does not apply to them. It's solely the VOCA and VAWA funded projects.
Would this apply to the assigning officials listed in e-grants, so like the project director and financial officer, like those three roles, if they're not funded or considered match?
Only if they are likely to have interaction with unaccompanied minors. So it depends on what their role is within the agency and within the project. I will note too, I know that I've said a couple times that are likely or expected to. So the intention isn't, if an individual that works for your agency or that's under the project really typically does not have interaction with unaccompanied minors. Like it's not typical, it rarely happens. And then all of a sudden one day they happen to pass by a child in the hallway or something. Like that does not trigger non-compliance. Like that really is not the intention. So don't worry about that. It's truly you're using the knowledge that you have of your agency to determine, is this person likely to have those interactions? And that's who then, I mean, it applies to everyone, but that's when it would trigger the response of the registry checks, background checks, et cetera.
I have 2 questions I believe are for Brandon. If we claim that certain staff and volunteers, et cetera, some of them do work with minors and some do not, what evidence will satisfy the CIB during audit to like show the difference between the two?
Sorry, so the difference between a volunteer and an employee, or somebody who works with children?
If there's some volunteers that do work with children, like some volunteers and staff and some that don't, how do they determine between the two?
So, we're reliant on, the audit, the agency, replying to these questions truthfully. So I think, from that perspective, yeah, I don't. Here. Oh.
There you go, I think you're back.
Okay, sorry. Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so if some staff do and some staff don't work with minors, how do they determine between the two and like prove that to the CIB during an audit?
So VCA is intended for individuals who work with children or vulnerable populations. So long as whether they're a volunteer or an employee, they're being run under the proper authority. There's no delineating between those types of populations. So as long as they're working with children or vulnerable adult populations, or vulnerable people in general, they kind of fall under that VCA umbrella. So we wouldn't really get down to that level in the audit.
And then my second question for you is, where'd it go? Would the fingerprint background checks eliminate the need to do out-of-state background checks?
So not the way that I understand it. What you'll get on a fingerprint-based background check is arrests that have been reported to another state's criminal history repository. And those arrests are then shared with the FBI. And then when a query is done or a submission is done, that searches the FBI's files for arrests in other states. So it will not satisfy things like checking the National Sex Offender Registry website, or maybe some other checks that might have to be required under this grant. So it's simply checking the FBI's arrest records.
So I have people with records I know, and if somebody is deemed unsuitable based upon this, is my step to just have a policy that they are not around unaccompanied minors, right? That's it. You don't have to let somebody go because of this.
So before I answer that directly, I am going to say that I think I would like to refer back to the OGP language just to make sure on those few specific items that they list that like are, okay, this is a deal breaker, like this absolutely means that they're not suitable to interact with minors. Just for clarification, if that means that they're not suitable at the agency period or just this piece of it, My understanding, though, to answer your question is that, yes, that is correct. Specifically, they would not be suitable to interact with minors. I will say, though, that those specific convictions that OJP refers to, they're pretty severe. And you may want to consider if the individual is appropriate for the agency. So it's not all charges. It doesn't mean, oh, if they have a felony, they're not suitable to interact with minors. It's just specific things. I know that we're running out of time. I do see a question in here that I don't know the answer to, and I think, Brandon, you'll have the answer to. So the question is a new set of fingerprints needed every 5 years, or could you use previously submitted fingerprint cards?
You need a new set of fingerprints for each fingerprint submitted. So every 5 years, you would need to recollect fingerprints.
Okay, so I really appreciate this dialogue. All of us really appreciate the feedback. I see a couple final questions. I'm going to answer them really quickly because I know that we're over time, and then recommend that please reach out to your grant manager. We want to continue these discussions. We want to help everyone through the process, and Brandon will be available to assist as well, so we can all work together. So I see a question about, so the deadline for having staff tested thumbprint is September, if I heard correctly. Yes. If we have summer camp employees working with children, do they need to be fingerprint tested for record this year? So the answer is no, technically. So the fingerprint-based background check piece needs to be in place by September 30th, 2023, but the suitability to interact with minors, that general process, including caregiver background checks, should already be in place, and so should be being done. And yes, that would apply for the camp employees over the summer. I think I saw a question a little ways back about, I guess, about including some of this feedback in reports. So yes, please feel free to include them in your program reports, and PMT. So yes, please utilize that. We are happy to pass that along and get that information from you in that way. Okay. Okay, so I apologize. I know we have some unanswered questions, but I think that's all we're going to be able to get to today. Please, if we have not addressed your question, please connect with us, connect with your grant manager or me or Justin. We're happy to work with you and Brandon, and we can also send you on your right way to your grant manager if that makes the most sense. This session has been recorded and we will send that out. We will also send out the supporting documents again, just so everyone has them. Thank you again for attending. Thank you for being engaged. We really appreciated this conversation with all of you. We hear your concerns, and we hope to be partners as we work through this. Enjoy your day and take care.